Hi, my name is Pat Mullally. I'm from golfgirls.com, and today I thought I'd spend a little bit of time helping the beginning golfer understand the golf scorecard, how you read the card, how you keep score, what those numbers mean, um, and how ultimately you're able to create something that you can put into the GHIN system to start building your handicap. So let's get started. When you get to the golf course, go to the pro shop. They will give you a card called a golf scorecard that you record your scores for each of the holes that you play. There are different tees depending on the course you're on and how good a player you are. That will determine from which tees you play. In this case, Sandwich Hollows here on Cape Cod, there are blue tees, white tees, and red tees, and you can see that the yardage from the tee box to the center of the green is indicated by the yardage for each of the holes. So in this case, the blue tees are 494 yards from the center of the green on the first hole. The white tees are 473, and the red tees are 455. If you look up and down each of the holes, hole number 1, hole number 2, you can see the difference in yardage plates measured to the green center. In this example we're going to use, we have 4 golfers who are going to play this day. Jim is a very good golfer. He'll be playing from the blue tees. Mike is an okay golfer. He's been struggling lately. He's playing from the whites. Tom is playing from the whites as well. And we have a 4th player, Susan, who is playing from the red tees. And oftentimes women who are good golfers but not great golfers will play from the red tees. It doesn't really matter. Anyone can play from any one of the tees. But traditionally, more often than not, women play from the red. They're shorter distance to the green, and they give women a bit of an advantage in some instances, but it evens out over the course of the golf round. Now, so not only do we have their names, you notice I've placed the 3 men nearer to the markers, blues and whites, and Susan, it's easier to keep track of her score in this lower section because it's next to the red tees. The par for each of the courses is indicated in the green bar on this golf scorecard, and each hole has a different par. Now, what is a par? A par is what a scratch golfer, someone who's very good, who often plays at 0 handicap or close to it, who it will take them an average number of strokes to get from the tee box to the hole, in the hole. So, for example, on this first hole, the par for all players is 5. For Jim, who's playing from the blue tees, he has 5 strokes to get from the tee box into the hole. Mike has the same, Tom the same, Susan the same. The difference of their yardage gives them some kind of a balance or an advantage there. So they're all playing to get 5 strokes into the hole. So in this example, Jim plays and he manages to get there in par, which is a 5. Mike doesn't have such a great time and he's a 7. Tom gets 1 over par, which is a 6. And Susan does the same. She's 1 over par. 1 over par is called a bogey. 2 over par, which is what Mike got, is a double bogey. Now you can add circles and squares just like the pros do on TV to mark these things, but when you do that, it often makes for a very messy card. So I'm not going to show you that right here. But just suffice it to say that as you begin to play, you put in each of the scores for each of the holes opposite the par for each of the holes. And so in this instance, our total scores come out. Add up the scores for each of the holes on each of the going out and coming back. You notice out is 1 through 9, those holes, and back is 10 through 18. And mark not only each of the total strokes for each hole, but then total them up so that the first 9 has a total, and then the back 9 has a total. And those go opposite the names. Okay. The other thing I'd like to point out is that, well, then the question becomes, okay, who won? Well, right now it looks like Jim won because he has 76. He had fewer strokes than either Mike, Tom, or Susan. But we have to take into consideration the fact that Jim is a very good player, and Mike and Tom and Susan are not as good. So what we have now is to put in the handicaps. Handicaps are determined by GHIN. What is GHIN? The Golf Handicap Index Network. And there's a formula that they use to determine this based on the ratings and slope of each of the golf courses. We'll get into that in another video. But suffice it to say that Jim has a handicap of 2, which means he gets 2 strokes over par, and Mike 10, Tom 6, and Susan 9. And that, on which holes does that happen for each of the players? You can see these little red dots show up, and this is done by computer more often than not, especially at a tournament. But those dots will indicate on which holes, based on the difficulty of the hole, does that player get a stroke or a handicap. And doing that in this way, it balances out the totals. Now, the one thing to note is the handicap and the difficulty of each of the holes. I didn't point this out earlier, but I should to help you understand. For the men who are playing from the blues and white tees, their handicap, you can see it marked right here. The hardest hole for them on this course is the very first hole, which is right here. Excuse me, the number 1 hole is the 9th hole. You see that it says a 1 with a circle around it. It's the 9th hole. And each one of them gets a stroke on that hole because it's the most difficult. That affects their total score. For Susan, who's playing from the red tees, the red handicap, the most difficult hole on this golf course, is the very first one. And she too gets a stroke on that. And she did pretty well in this case. When you take into consideration the handicap and the difficulty of the holes that you accomplished the par or didn't or whatever, then that gives you what's called a net score. And in this case, the net score, based on handicap, based on performance, gives Susan the game. She did better than any of the other guys. And so that's how you score, mark the scorecard and determine who is actually the winner. Now, at the very end, after all is said and done, you then have to sign the scorecard to attest to it. So the scorer will put his name in, and then after adding everything up and double checking, someone will add their name as attesting to the truth of the scorecard, and then finally date it. And that can be passed in. If it's a tournament, you pass that into the pro shop. If you belong to the club, you can insert your GHIN or your final score to the GHIN network on computers or at the club computer. Do it at home. There's lots of ways to get there. But that's the basics of a scorecard and how you mark it. So, all the best.